Welcome into the ArtGibbs Sports Business Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. We've got a special one today. We're joined by Peter Stetina. Many of you will know him as a top-tier road cyclist, rode the Tour de France multiple times, rode for Trek Segafredo most recently, and is now a gravel cyclist and part of this gravel cycling movement. He's a self-proclaimed privateer. And so we talked a little bit about that, about the differences in sponsorship and kind of the individuality of gravel cycling compared to the road. And it was a great conversation, and we really appreciated him coming on. So without further ado, I'll send you over there now. Ladies and gentlemen, Peter Stetina. Thank you. All right, so we're joined here by Peter Stetina. Thanks for coming on the podcast. We really appreciate it. And,
thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. And I think we'll start off with kind of a little bit, just for the viewers, if they don't know, just a little bit about your pro career on the road and kind of your path to gravel, and maybe what made that shift.
I rode for over a decade in the World Tour. I started doing all the big races in the U.S., everything coming up in the probably 2006 through 2010, when U.S. was really having a kind of a big boom after in like the post-Lance Tour de France era, and there's road cycling was so hot. And then I joined the World Tour, did a decade there doing the Tour de France and all that stuff, the top tier of the sport. And then coming into 2020, I saw this movement happening within the US mostly. I mean, it is trending worldwide, but it's mostly US founded. And it is just this discipline we call gravel, which is very grassroots, but it's exploded. And whereas sponsorship is drying up in other realms and races and teams are closing shop, gravel's like lotteries to get in because there's so much want. And so it was kind of this light bulb moment where personally I was having a lot more fun doing it. It was a much more gratifying way of riding and racing a bike and being a pro cyclist. And secondly, it was kind of this light bulb moment where it was like, wow, I think I can make a living doing this. Like, I don't have to be a world tour racer just moonlighting on the gravel. Like, I think this has enough legs to be its own thing. So I kind of went full speed into that and completely switched career paths.
So what do you think's driving some of that difference where you've got these world tour teams really, or are you talking about world tour or even below that on the road where the sponsorship is kind of drying up, or it's a tough environment there? What do you think's driving that kind of drying up and gravel really exploding?
It's a whole host of factors, but the biggest thing I think is that in the US specifically, cycling is a participatory sport, whereas in Europe, it's still very much a spectator sport. In Europe, fans are more than happy to camp out for a week on Alpe d'Huez and wait for the tour to roll through just for that glimpse and appreciate the athletic effort, so to speak. And in the US, we never, maybe once in a while in the Tour Colorado or the Tour California, we had big crowds on a certain climb, but most people in the US, you don't want to watch other people just exercising, even though if cycling, it's much more nuanced than that. However, so I think it's that combined with the fact that, the road bubble, the Lance, Tyler Hamilton, Levi area has popped a bit. Just, we don't have a big Tour de France level contender anymore. There was a bunch of guys, my graduating class, which was, TJ Van Garderen and myself and all these guys, we've done well. And, TJ especially, and there hasn't really been like a big name to bring it home. Maybe Sepp Kuss will change that. He's a really exciting guy right now. But, I think that was kind of the first thing. So, it's the public interest isn't there. And then you have, in the US specifically, to have a permit to hold a road race is so expensive. To close roads in the
Yes.
US, like, people don't play ball. In
It's
Europe,
like
they do.
$1,000 a kilometer.
It's crazy. I mean, just the CHP and all of that, and everyone complaining, and it's really hard as an organizer. You need to have a lot of funds, and the fan base to support it just isn't there. However, gravel, I mean, all of a sudden you're talking off road, you're talking less traffic, less danger, more of an experiential event, and everything kind of just lined up.
Sure.
So.
Yeah. So the team aspect, does it change kind of compared to the road and the gravel? Like, I talked a little bit about this with TJ Eisenhart about how you've kind of got this on the road, you've got a team, it's got its select, 3 or 4 main sponsors. They sponsor everybody on the team. As you said, these teams, they're constantly fighting for the next sponsor or to maintain that sponsor for one more year or that kind of thing. Is there a difference in the team with gravel? Like, are many of the riders individual, or are there a lot of teams on gravel?
Both. I think it's mostly individuals, or it's supported by individuals. I don't think there are gravel teams. I'll preface it with that. There are off-road teams, more mountain bike teams, kind of like Payson's Orange Sealed Squad, that rally around a central rider. And they do have some sort of team system around it. I think it's more kind of like the mountain bike team template, where it's a small core collective group, and there's one team manager and one mechanic. I think there's a few elite level domestic gravel teams that have a bit more. They're still kind of based on like that, almost like the club team format. But for the most part, it's very individualistic in gravel at the moment. It's what I call the privateer business model, where you're out doing you're finding your own way, you're making your own deals, and you don't really have to answer to anybody, which is good as well. And, I think a lot of guys have been successful doing that. Myself, you got Colin Strickland and Ted King, Amity Rockwell on the women's side, Kathy Pruitt, and it allows an athlete to have a voice, have a personality, which is very valued in gravel, because gravel's not just about racing bikes. It's about the experience, the after party, the community. So I think it's just as important to have a character, so to speak. And I think what you're actually seeing in gravel is fans are actually aligning with and following different characters rather than just their favorite teams, so to speak. I think a lot of people align with me because I unapologetically care about my performance. Like, I'm training, I'm serious, I'm here to have a good time, but I'm going to race you. I have a number on my bike. Whereas Colin Strickland is kind of this tinkerer, like soldering stuff when he's not riding his bike. He plays the guitar. TJ is an artist, very laissez-faire in his ethos. So, it's very, and I think people can align and see themselves in different and support different
and that's
riders.
Attractive as a whole to the audience. You've got all this melting pot of characters, and it's very accessible. They can sign up for the race too and go out and ride. They may be way behind, but at the after party they see you there.
And that's why gravel as a business is so strong, because it is that shared experience. And you, instead of inviting pro teams there and having to make money off of sponsorships and TV coverage or whatever. I mean, you have the pros it's the marathon format, right? Pros in the front, a whole bunch of age groupers behind, and everyone's out there doing that together. And if you and I showed up to the Mid-South together, even if I rode it 2 hours faster than you, we both went through that same thing. And at the end, we can cheers or commiserate over beers with that. And that's a very powerful thing. And we all had a story to tell. And that just kind of brings it all the way back to what I said, is that cycling is participatory in the US right now.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. It kind of reminds me of like in the running community, something like those like Ragnar races where
Hmm.
you go there, it's a 24-hour race, trail race, you have a team, and your team could be made up of, collegiate runners and people that barely run, and it doesn't matter. And in the end, you're all going to have a great time, and you're there for that kind of love of the sport. You all go through, like you said, you all go through the same thing together. You go through this 24 hours of racing in the cold and wet and whatever. And same with, the gravel cycling, and people can really, identify with that.
I think so. And I think, it's a lot more gratifying as a fast guy pro too, because um, you can actually use your experience and help other, because everyone following you, I mean, people are interested in the speed and who's winning the race, right? It's a
Sure.
competition. But I mean, most people, I mean, they obviously that you care about yourself more. And so if you're doing this event, you care about how you're going to do. Are you going to complete it? Are you going to get your PR? Are you going
Hmm.
to beat your drinking buddy or whatever it is, And so if I can share some of my experience that I've gleaned over my time in the pros to help you do better, whether it's on tire pressure or fueling or whatever it is, tactics, then that will better aid you. And so I think we have a kind of a commonality to base each other off of,
Yeah, for
and
sure.
I have a platform to speak and do my job. And you, not you, Curtis, but the listener, the gravel participant has hopefully can provide. I can give them some insight that
Sure.
they care
Yeah, of
about.
course. Yeah. So what is the difference in kind of that like athlete sponsor relationship when you're
Mm.
on the team and you're on the road? What kind of relationship or communication do you have with the sponsor? And then when you're in gravel and you've gone out and kind of negotiated these own deals yourself, do you have a better connection? Are you able to give more to the sponsor, less? Like, how does that kind of relationship work in gravel versus the road?
Yeah, I think it's easy if I just explain how the European pro model works.
Sure.
A lot of people in the U.S. don't realize it because it's very different than a guy who's just has a Pro 1-2 license domestically. In Europe, it is just like the NFL or the NBA. I mean, I have an agent, or I did, and they were the ones that did my contract negotiations with the teams. They would basically treat me like a stock market, I guess, and offer me out to different teams. And if they
Yeah.
were looking for, in my case, climbing domestique who could handle it through 3 weeks of a grand tour, then they
Sure.
were interested. It was one big deal. The agent did it all. I had no discussions around. I mean, obviously, you give your input and your preferences,
Sure.
and the end decision is with me who to sign with. But um, it was very much, like one big contract, salary, performance incentives, however that's structured out. And then I am tied to that team, usually for 2 years is the standard. Um, and and you give your agent the cut, and then you have to represent everyone that team does. So they have their whole own portfolio of sponsors, and you would get all your stuff at training camp. And you just focus on racing your bike. And every once in a while at races, on rest days of grand tours, there's VIP things that you have to kind of go mingle with paying guests for,
Sure.
autograph signings. But very much you weren't supposed to talk to the actual sponsors. I mean, that was a card that the teams kept close to their chest. I mean, maybe once a year I was called in to do a photo shoot with our clothing sponsor or something, or test a bike, for example, and do like a direct feedback. But it was very much like a don't speak unless you're spoken to, or if you have feedback, you have to give it to this team sponsor liaison who then passes
Yeah.
it on to the
Yeah.
sponsors. Because a lot of riders aren't honestly educated or sympathetic enough to provide constructive criticism at times too, and so it could really jeopardize a
Yeah.
team sponsorship if
Sure.
some rider um, who is angry about a product, so to speak, just goes and, vents an email to the president of said company because they're a big name rider, like that doesn't go over well either. So, it was very much keep them at a distance. And the changeover was often. However, I did do enough of these projects, and I actually had enough good contacts from my time in the world tour that when I did decide to strike off on my own, I was able to kind of pull out that Rolodex and say, like, guys, like, this is going to be a journey. Will you join me? And it was a resounding yes. And so now it is very much the buck stops with me. And it's a lot more work. The hustle is real because instead of just training and focusing on my body, I mean, I'm doing all the logistics, the plane flights, the budgeting, the spreadsheet, but also the sponsors, the pitch decks. And it's a lot of work, but it's also more rewarding because basically I have that direct connection with sponsors who believe in me and I consider them friends. So, I can call up Shimano, for example, and be like, hey, what do you think about changing this thing a little bit? Like, do you think this is a prototype we could talk about someday? Or, what is the one product you're really trying to hide this year? Like, is it, gearing ratios or this new like Ultegra coming out or whatever it is, right? So there's a lot more of a direct personal relationship and it's a lot more gratifying. And it also allows me to do my job on the promotional side of things better because they tell me exactly how they want me to market their materials so that they can hit their goals. So it's just a much more holistic experience.
Sure. Yeah. And it seems like maybe there's kind of an added benefit that over time with that more direct connection, the products that that you use as a rider may improve at a better clip, having that more direct kind of relationship and feedback. It may be almost like an unintended thing over time. You get the Shimano stuff.
Oh, selfishly, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm only trying to change products that make me go faster on the bike.
Exactly. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
It's a very selfish pursuit. This is true.
Sure. Well, yeah. So you kind of mentioned a little bit about the logistics and stuff. What does the calendar look like in the sport? Like, how many events are there? How many events might like you do versus like a rider further back in the pack, or is it the same? And then maybe like, what has the event growth looked like? Is it a lot of smaller events? Is it kind of regionalized, or what does that kind of look like right now?
I think I'll tackle this in a perfect world scenario because we all know the pandemic has thrown everything upside down and it is all regional focused at the moment. However, before COVID started, there were over 700 gravel events in the US that had a spot. Everyone was fighting for position on the calendar. There was multiple races. I mean, generally organizers are trying to not conflict with races in their region. So two NorCal promoters are going to try to not hit the same weekend. And even that's happening. And there's a lot to choose from. And myself as a pro, I am trying to highlight and help the gravel discipline become even more legitimate than it already is. I'm traveling a lot. I'm going to every big one. And I'm also trying to highlight local ones that are easy for me to get to or just look like a damn good time. There's a lot of fun, goofy ones that are small. So it's kind of a balance of that. And then you have to look, so I'm racing every weekend or every other weekend from normally March through the end of October. It's a lot. And then I have to balance my marriage with that. It's a whole nother juggle. So you have to start looking at the whole, like the picture of the US and internationally, right? You get it on a map and you look at the weekends and how it flows together. Like, okay, I'm in the West Coast, right? I can't go to Kansas and then 2 weeks later do another Kansas race and then an Iowa or something like that, right? Because it's too much time away from home and it's just too much back and forth, both for my logistic and the cost and the time. So I'm trying to kind of select, like, hey, I'll block like 3 weekends of East Coast races together, and that'll be my East Coast trip, or I'll loop 2 international things in mainland Europe together. So I'm really trying to have some flow to my calendar, while at the same time focusing on peaking for the biggest events, right? The Mid-South, the Unbounds, the Leadville, the Steamboats.
Sure.
And also, there is some sponsor input, but it's very minimal just because they're just kind of like, gravel's hot. I'm in a luxurious position of, at the moment, if I go to an event, there will be more eyes on that event because I'm one of the more well-known pros in gravel. And I hope that changes. I hope more and more fast guys come and this continues to become a thing. But for the moment, that's the case.
Wow. Yeah. So like those 700 races, are they pretty full? I mean, they're getting the people there. I mean, not that you've been to every race, but
yeah,
that's really what's driving it, is just the huge demand for signups, basically.
I think the biggest ones are the ones that are really like, you're hearing about these races that are filling out their lottery within 3 hours or whatever it is, right? Those are the biggest ones. Regional events you can almost always get into and just kind of do your normal pre-race registration. You might be out of luck if you're trying to do day of. It's all, it's every end of the spectrum. I mean, you have races that are literally, they're going to get some amount of press because there's some fast guy and girl in the US that's going to show up and they're no registration, just show up and we're going to do this crazy ride. And I hired a photographer to like full, like BWR is run like a, Tour of California, like full production. It's insane. So, and everything in between. The big ones, you have to plan for and make sure your name is in that pot early and really commit to it though.
Yeah. That's similar to like the marathon model. Like you mentioned earlier, the top marathons, it's like a multi-year process. Unless you're, an elite, maybe below 212 or whatever for a guy. But then there's marathons, obviously, that you could walk up and walk right into. So what do you kind of see for maybe the future of gravel? I know that there's EF is kind of, they've got a gravel component, and I don't know what exactly that's like. Like, you may know more about that. Is it riders that also ride on the road, or is it just gravel riders specifically? Right. And what do you see more teams coming in, or, what do you think is going to happen there in that sense?
It's only getting faster and more competitive. And I think COVID kind of stymied that for a bit. And now it's simmering, but it's coming back. Gravel isn't going anywhere. It's still on everyone's lips. Whereas last winter, that was all anyone could think about, Sure. But it's big. So the EF model, and it's actually what I did last year too, although my team at the time, Trek Segafredo, didn't market it that. But basically, I went to Trek and was like, hey, World Tour, Tour de France, Vuelta, all that stuff, like that's my focus. I'm 100% committed to that. Yeah. I want to do some of this fun stuff when I'm at home and it fits our team calendar and it makes sense for Trek's marketing. And they said, heck yes. And that's pretty much what EF is doing. So their main gravel guys are Lachlan Morton and Alex Howes, who's a very close buddy of mine. And Alex Howes is the current road national champion. He wears the stars and stripes in the world's biggest races. Lockie is a very well-known road pro. That's their quote unquote day job. However, Rafa, one of their main sponsors, sees the importance of gravel and Lockie and Alex's passion around it. And so they kind of did the same thing. They just highlighted certain races, and they're sending these two, and sometimes maybe other guys too, I don't know, road pros to selected events that fit within the team's overall outline. Sure. While balancing the world tour. They are not dedicated gravel only. Also because, silly enough, the UCI, the current governing body of cycling, does not actually see gravel as an actual discipline. So I don't actually need a racing license at the moment, which is, they just totally missed the boat on that.
Sure.
and now they're kind of scraping to come back. But there's a very resounding F off from gravel organizers saying, we got this, we're doing just fine. Stop sticking your hand in our honey pot. However, that's a whole nother story. So anyway, there's a few local, not local, domestic gravel teams, I think there's that Panaracer team out of the US, which they might do like road stuff too. I think they're based in Texas, but they actually send like core 5-6 guys to gravel events. However, there's not like a bunch of dedicated gravel teams. And I think there's a big push not to have that, because nobody wants to have gravel racing become road racing off-road. No one wants the team tactics, the sitting on.
Yeah, you have to have the team to win.
Pulling a guy so he takes off in the last hour and like all of that. Like, and that's because that's what ruined road racing for a lot of people. And gravel is that gentleman's race right now, where we're all taking pulls until you can't anymore. Sure. It's really refreshing. So I'm sure gravel teams will come, especially with American road racing just like on its deathbed at the moment. I mean, there's not a very good calendar. Crit racing is doing well, but the road racing, because of permitting and the cost, sponsor dollars, I mean, a lot of teams are sending their riders to gravel events to provide value. And for a lot of riders, like those are some of the only endurance events happening in the US right now.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. Do you want to hit a little bit on that UCI thing? Does it function as potentially almost like impending regulation out there, or will, can they come in and force people to have a license, or can organizers just say, we're not going to be a UCI event, or what is that kind of relationship like?
The UCI they are a for-profit company. They are basically the recognized body for the International Olympic Committee. So their power is held in that the IOC that runs the Olympics says that the UCI is like the cycling governance board. So they are the ones they talk to and create regulations and set all that out. And so then the UCI has rules that certain race organizers pay into to guarantee that certain teams will come, right? So, the UCI, they're trying to be more inclusive, I think, but in the past, they're like, hey, if you hold a UCI card, you can't do an unsanctioned race, because then that's not part of our portfolio. We're actually going to fine you and take away your license to do our races, right? And so people have kind of just said, screw you to some of them. And then gravel has gotten big enough, and the UCI was like, oh, this is just like Americans having their fun. Yeah. They didn't, and now that there's so much money and so much industry,
now they see the money and it's like, wait a minute.
And so what do they have? As the legislative body, they can put on world championships, right? They could crown a gravel world champion, which, I mean, I'm conflicted, because as a gravel pro, and for my sponsors and my own personal dreams, right,
you want
to be
that
a
championship.
World champion, right? The rainbow stripes, that's a thing. However, I think a lot of these main races, the Unbounds, the SBTs, they are doing just fine without the UCI. And if the UCI comes in, they say, hey, you have to pay these fees. You have to adhere to these rules. You have to have these licenses. You have to use our insurances, for example, our officials. And it does throw a whole bunch of regulation in there. I mean, I think UCI tried to throw out something this spring that was like, we're gonna have a gravel worlds, and to make sure we keep it fun, like we're not gonna allow any people with body fat below a certain percentage, because that means you're too pro and you care too much instead of being in it for the fun. It was like, you guys really just missed the boat on this. That's how you're gonna regulate it, by pinching my tummy before they start? Like, are you kidding me right now? So it's
like, we're the cool guys. We're the cool guys.
Exactly. It's coming. They will make gravel things. I don't know if I think for example, maybe I'll go to UCI Worlds because I'll have to and because I will care about it. But at the same time, I'm probably going to prioritize Unbound and BWR more than it. Like that's going to kind of be an
Sure.
afterthought race and just hope that something cool happens. And it's it's a weird time. There's a lot shifting.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because, kind of like you mentioned, there's this at the beginning in the US, like the spectator component of the sport is not really there. And gravel and I was kind of interested in that, like cyclocross, which I know is different. It's a UCI thing, but you see it in Belgium. It's like a
Mhm.
really tight crit. It's packed in, people are there, they're in the cold, they're able to, you know, go to the main tent area and kind of party and have fun and be at that event. And that gravel, it can bring that. And if it starts and finishes at a big brewery or something like that,
Right.
versus this sort of, UCI kind of having their hands all over it, that's going to be attractive to people. And ultimately, you can still you probably can ultimately make more money at the top of those events, just like you see in, um, road marathons and those kinds of things, getting those numbers of people to spectate, making it fun for them. It doesn't hinder the top riders, top athletes, top sponsors. It's actually kind of has that opposite effect. So
Right.
hopefully that, like you said, some of these big events can remain fun, legitimately
I think
fun.
so.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see where it goes. I know USA Cycling. I mean, they have to come into gravel because that's the only thing happening in the U.S. at the moment. Not the only thing,
Well,
but
it's the growth. It's the future.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so what and it'll be really interesting to see what they do because I understand they're in a hard position and they've had to reinvent themselves since you know the boom of road. But a lot of people don't want. I know race organizers don't want to use USAC's insurance, for example, because they can get their own insurance cheaper through a third party. Or,
Yeah.
I think, people, registrants are like, wait, I'm going to have to pay not only my entry fee, but like now a 1-day license or an annual license as well. Like it's just right now it's another burden, but I know they're interested and their eyes are on it, and it'll be really interesting to see what they come up with because they do recognize that this is about the masses and it's not just about churning profit. So
Sure. Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, is there anything else that's kind of the sort of main list of questions I had? Is there anything else that jumps out at you or anything you'd like to add, you know, before we finish up?
no, I think anyone looking to get into gravel, I cannot. I don't know what the right way to say this is. I strongly suggest doing the privateer model and thinking about yourself and your brand because especially with the age of the Instagram influencer and all that stuff, right?
Sure.
Like it's you find you do what makes you tick, and I'm going to do what makes me tick, and we're all going to find our own way in this together. And you can really think about your brand and what you stand for and align yourself with companies that want to support it. From a lifestyle aspect, because the lifestyle is just as important right now. So, that's something
Sure.
that I really had to focus on is, going out and finding sponsors that really make sense and that aren't too few and aren't too many and that all tell a story. And once you really create that brand and your business, then it's so much more gratifying because it compounds on itself and every day is fun. So even if you're not able to get sponsored or paid by a company, just think about who you like and when you are able to represent them and tag them in whatever you're doing online or anything. They'll appreciate it and they'll see the organic nature of it. I think that's the most important is staying organic and staying true, because if you just look like you're peddling a product, people don't care. It's really about finding that niche and why. I mean, I think people see I'm tagging Athletic Brewing, for example. Yes, they're a sponsor, but I think people are understanding it's because I believe in them. It's because I actually use this on a day-to-day basis and it actually fits into the greater idea of what Pete Stetina, the privateer, is, of, having that beer, but also caring about your performance the next day. I'm not going to go have a triple IPA the night before a race, that kind of thing, so it's about finding those nuances and finding your own way through it.
Yeah. And you have that opportunity with that athlete sponsorship connection to do that, to get the right sponsors, to have the right products, to speak more organically and like honestly and truthfully. And that's going to help them. That's going to help the sponsors and you in the long run.
I hope so.
Yeah. Especially with other things not being that way, it's going to stick out and it'll be an advantage in that sense. All right. Well, we really appreciated it. And thank you so much for coming on. You're welcome back in the future. We can check in and see
for sure
where gravel racing is in, months, years, etc. And thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. That was a fun one.
All right. Have a great day. Thanks.
You too.